We are running through a complete beginner calisthenics push day, and this is something you can start at absolutely any base level of strength and continue this for weeks to months as you start to build strength and progress through each variation of the exercises that we'll be going through. You'll see here I have absolutely no equipment besides a towel on the floor. You don't even need a towel. All you need is the floor and a couple chairs to do some of the dip variations, but other than that, you need nothing besides a couple hands in the floor. So we're pretty good to go. What we're trying to do here is build the necessary strength and foundation to eventually get us to a point so we can do handstand push-ups, planche variations, hold a really strong clean handstand, elbow levers, all of those good push exercises, and build the necessary strength and size in our chest, shoulders, triceps. But enough of me rambling on, let's get stuck into this session. Okay guys, so obviously we're starting with a warm-up, but I'll quickly show you through how we can structure absolutely any warm-up for any session, and we'll quickly go through this. So very firstly, we want to think about ticking off the 3 key structures that'll set us up for a good session. So firstly, what we do is we wrist stuff. So we do some wrist push-ups, about 8 to 12 reps of these just to get our wrist flexors firing. And then we want to think about mobility as well. So we do some wrist circles and we kind of circle around and change the position of our hands to really open up different areas of where we're at and where we needed to go. Just intuitively do this, feel where you need to kind of stretch and what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and do this for about 30 seconds. So now that we've ticked off our wrists and indirectly our elbows a little bit too, we want to think about our shoulders now. And since we're doing a push session, what we'll do is our scat push-ups. So we'll kind of be trying to keep our elbows as extended as we can, bringing our shoulder blades down, and then bringing them all the way forward and doing a few reps of these. If you do need to flex your elbows a little bit just to feel moving through those shoulder blades, then that's gonna be the best bit for you. But do your best to really lock it out and focus on that movement through there. The second shoulder exercise we'll quickly go through is a Y raise. So here we're getting into that Y position, and you see how I'm extending here? Don't do that. Keep your chin on the floor like this, look forward, raise up as high as you can, control it back down. Raise up, control it back down. So we've ticked off our wrists, ticked off our shoulders. Now we want to think about engaging our core and getting some core activation happening. And a great way to do that, especially for a push session when we're doing some handstand stuff too, is a hollow body hold. So there's 2 variations of this. If you're strong enough, you can try and lift up both legs and hold that position for a couple seconds, slow it back down. Hold for a couple seconds, slow it back down. But if that's too difficult for you, which is totally fine, we can do alternating arm and leg and control it back down. So do the variation that you can perform. Obviously it's a warm-up, so it doesn't have to be too intense. This one's totally fine. So now that we've ticked off all 3 of those key areas, we want to think about doing some priming exercises or some warm-up exercises for that first exercise. So the first exercise we're doing is a push-up variation. So what we can do is an easier regression of that. So if we're at push-ups or maybe even pike push-ups if you're quite strong, what we can start off with is just doing some higher rep kneeling push-ups just to get those muscles firing and the blood flow pumping through those joints and muscle fibers that will be working very shortly. And obviously if kneeling push-ups are just way too easy for you, you can do these as normal push-ups, but only if they are too easy for you. For most of you, kneeling push-ups are just fine for the warm-up. So we've quickly gone through that. Well, let's get stuck into that first exercise. So now we're trying to build up a push-up variation. So this will look different for everybody. You'll either be doing some form of push-up variation or some form of vertical press variation. So I'll explain the push-up variation firstly, and we'll be working through a fair few sets, so 4 sets of about that 4 to 6 rep range. So still very strength dominant, but we'll still be building size in this process as well. And this is for most of the session as well. So the first variation is obviously a push-up. So here you'll see there's a straight line from my head to toe, and then I'm coming all the way down with my elbows relatively tucked, chest to the ground, pushing all the way up and extending my elbows at the top. And that is the exact same if you're doing a kneeling push-up as well for this. The form does not change whatsoever. It's the exact same. Obviously, it's just our knees touching the ground. But if you are competent with them and you're getting well over 4 to 6 reps, which I'd say a lot of you may be doing, we can start working toward more of a pike push-up. So there's 3 variations of this pike push-up that we can work through. The very first one I'll show you is the second hardest, and this is how you want to get the form right. There is a nice straight line between my hands and my hips, and then there's another straight line towards my heels, and that creates a nice triangle. That's the starting position you want to get into. So we're really piked and high, and then from here, you'll see how I'm lifting my feet onto my toes, and I'm shifting the weight forward, and then touching my nose to the floor, pressing up on that vertical path. So you'll see how I'm pressing with my shoulders, and what I'm not doing is this. So that is just a ridiculous pike hip, weird push-up variation. We want to be in that pike position and getting back into that triangle position while staying rounded on that forward lean. So if that's going to be too difficult for you and something you progress toward, I'm absolutely all for that, because it is a lot more difficult than you might think. So what you can start on, if push-ups obviously too easy, we can start doing a half pike push-up. So half pike push-ups, to see how I'm not too high, my hands and feet are pretty far away from each other, but we're still getting into that triangle position, shifting forward, nose to the floor, pressing on that kind of vertical path or that diagonal path. So the form's the same, it's just that little bit easier. So that is a really good starting point for those pike variations. In terms of the progressions now, we can start elevating our feet to a more elevated pike, and you can grab a chair and do an elevated pike push-up. And if you're very strong and you've been doing this for a while, you can even work toward doing some wall-assisted handstand push-ups, but that's gonna take a little bit of time. So the second exercise now, we have obviously dips. Just grab a couple chairs. Try not to break your chairs as well. I don't want anyone's parents messaging me saying, hey, my kid broke my chair because of you. But either way, we'll be working through either tricep dips or chest dips on this one, and obviously working through that similar set and rep range to obviously continue to build strength and size and conditioning, which is super important for this variation. So for the very first variation, so in terms of chest dips, if you're at the chest dip level, or whether you're doing negatives or normal chest dips, this is going to be relevant to you. So the starting position is going to be completely locked out with your elbows, and you'll see how my elbow pits are facing to the front of the room, so they're not like this, kind of like slightly bent, but mostly straight. I want them locked out to the front of the room. Some people might not be able to do that, so if it is looking like that, that is okay. For most of you, have that coming facing forward. And you also want to think about not shrugging, pushing the shoulders down. So that is the starting position and at the top of each rep. From there, come down to an active stretch of your shoulders, coming back up. For most of you, that's gonna be about 90 degrees or a little bit further. Try not to neck yourself with the chair as well, and that's gonna be your rep. For the negative reps, obviously you're just gonna do the negative portion, control it as deep as you can, and stand back up. So these are totally fine too, whatever makes you get into the rep range. For some of you, obviously you may have to just start with some tricep dips. So getting a chair that is roughly around your knee height is gonna be the best thing for you. And from here, there's two variations as well for all of you. So ideally, we wanna get our legs as straight as possible, start our hips touching the chair, or at least as close as we can to it. And from here, we're dipping down, keeping our elbows tucked, getting as deep as we can, or as deep as like obviously touching the floor, which is most ideal, and pressing up. Making sure our elbows aren't flaring out to the side, keep them tucked. We want to keep that load on the triceps in this position. So that is the position you want to get to. If that's still difficult for you, you can start to walk your feet a little bit closer to make that variation just that little bit deeper, but easier, sorry. But you just want to try and get as deep as you can, and obviously pressing down at the top and locking out those elbows, the exact same thing. So third exercise now, here we're building up that essential hip flexor and core strength. And for this variation, we're gonna wanna take our shoes off to make our life a heck of a lot easier. If you're at the gym and you don't wanna take your shoes off because your shoes smell, by all means keep them on. It's just gonna make it a bit harder for yourself. And we also need some form of platform to raise our hands off. If you're at home, a couple books works well, parallettes, dumbbells, whatever you can. We're not actually reading the books, even though Atomic Habits, very good read. Either way, what we're doing here is an L-sit variation. So we're gonna be working through 4 different variations here, and obviously choosing the variation that is suited you for your strength so you can get in that desired rep range. So the very first variation, which will sum up most of the form tips as well, what we're trying to do is lifting up ourselves as high as we possibly can. So once again, locking out our elbows so our armpits are facing as far forward as we can, or as our anatomy allows us to. And then from here, we want to try and push our shoulders down as much as we can, same as that top of that chest dip. And then from here, you want to try and raise up one leg and hold that the whole time. And then for the following set, you obviously do the different leg. If that's a little bit too easy for you, what you can try and get yourself into is an N sit. So see how my leg's in a bit of an N position? So I'm raising up here and getting into that position. Also, the higher your platforms are, the easier a lot of this is gonna be. So be mindful of that too. If that N sit's gonna be a little bit too comfortable for you, what you can progress to is a single leg L sit. Obviously changing legs either side, and then eventually we want to get to a point where we can perform an L sit. You'll see here, see how my hips are mostly in line with my wrists, so we don't want to have our hips kind of like this. It's going to make it a little bit too easy. And then obviously further forwards, it's actually gonna make it harder. So that's a progression we can kind of think about doing later on. But try your best to keep your wrists and hips in that same line together. So this is the second last exercise now, and here we're building up the strength and the conditioning needed to hold a handstand and obviously eventually progress that handstand push-up, which is exciting. So here, we're either doing this in an elevated pike position or even a normal pike position off the floor, or we can do handstand holds. So what we want to try and get into is just that nice handstand position where we're getting as vertical as we possibly can. We want to think about trying to touch our shoulders to our ears and lifting up as high as we possibly can. If that is even still too difficult for you, by all means, you're more than welcome to do it straight off the ground. To try and lean as far forward as you can and really put as much weight on those shoulders while obviously trying to keep them as strong as possible. Ideally, you've been progressing to some wall-assisted holds, and you can do this back to wall or stomach to wall, whatever you feel more comfortable doing. Back to wall, you obviously have to throw yourself up, but we just have to make sure we have really good alignment. So I don't want to see stuff like this with our hips just resting in there. What I want you to do is to really try and imagine there's a straight line between your hands and your feet. So you're shrugging up, pushing the ground down beneath you, lifting yourself up as high as you possibly can, and really generating that strong alignment. And obviously, if you find it easier walking up the wall, you're a bit more comfortable in that position, by all means, you can do that. Just make sure you get back into that really solid, strong alignment. So the final exercise now, and this one is incredibly important from learning push calisthenics and learning up the technical side of all of these next calisthenics skills that you'll be learning in the future. And that is, I'm sure you've learned it, is a planche lean, but please listen to how to do it from the technical side of things. This is so incredibly important. So there's just a few things you need to focus on. Firstly, hand position, wrists are angled out about that 45-degree angle. So putting our thumbs forward, fingers on the 45 lateral side. That makes sense to you? And then from here, we're thinking about the same thing. Elbow pits facing forward, getting into a nice straight push-up position. You'll see here how I'm kind of not arching my back. I'm really tucking in my pelvis. We call this posterior tilt. You don't have to think about that. Just think about you're sucking in a shit. So you feel like you need a shit, so you're sucking it in. Sorry about that, but it does work. And then from here, we want to think about just starting to push our shoulder blades higher. So rounding our upper back as much as we can, while also simultaneously leaning forward and keeping our hips down. You see there's a nice straight line from my heel to where my upper back starts to round, and that is exactly what you want to see. To be honest, this is a much more difficult exercise than you might think. To make it harder, you simply lean further forward and make sure your form stays absolutely perfect. Okay guys, so that is the full workout. You can see it here on the screen for you. I'd really recommend training this 1 to 2 times a week, or at least getting some variations in an extra time of the week so you can try and hit some of those key movements twice a week. Super important, especially in those beginning stages, to build up that strength. And lastly, if you've come this far, I highly recommend joining my free calisthenics community. It's also early access at the moment. I haven't even released it. So since you've come this far, you can click that link below. I don't know why you wouldn't. Be sure to subscribe, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, all the rest of it. Hope it all helps. Have a good one.